Today I'm finishing up part 2 about historical heresies of the course Overcoming the Darkness, a Christian response to the cults, false religions, and the occult. And we're going through the remaining historical heresies briefly. Another area is concerning sin. The Pelagians believe that Adam's sin only affected himself and that we become sinners simply by our own actions. Then you have the federal theory. That is simply the belief that Adam represented all of mankind. So what he did, he broke God's law, he sinned, and it was passed through to all people through all of time. And then you have determinism, which simply says man cannot help to do what he does because it's already determined. And there are many other historical heresies about sin. There were historical heresies concerning salvation and the atonement. For example, the accident theory is that Jesus' death was completely meaningless. It didn't have any effect upon anyone. It was just simply an example. Then you had the martyr theory. He died as a martyr. Simply an example for us to follow in walking in faith. Then you had the governmental theory, that in his death, God made an example of his hatred for sin. And this way, God maintains his respect for the holy law so that we realize what obedience to God's law is all about. And there are many others, historical heresies concerning sin and salvation. Let me just mention one other, the eradication theory, that Christ took upon himself our sinful, depraved nature, and through his sufferings, he completely purified us. So in effect, we became perfect, which obviously is heretical. Now, another area of heresies is concerning faith. And for example, the Apostle Paul and James struggle with the whole concept of faith and works. And we're talking about dead works. What do you have if you don't have faith? What if you have faith but no works? And so forth. So there were a lot of historical heresies dealing with faith as well. Now, another area of heretical teachings is concerning sacred writings or revelations. Many people believe that all writings were sacred and revelations from God. That's why, for example, the Gospel of Thomas was not included in the Christian canon, because even though it appeared to be written by an apostle, it really, if you read it, it's nowhere near the same as the New Testament. Or the Gospel of Paul and I believe it's Thela. You know, there was this romance between them. But again, it's like reading a novel. So many writings were not included simply because they didn't meet the standard of other apostolic writings. Now, another area of historical heresies is the second coming of Christ. Some people believe that the second coming had already occurred in the first century. And even at the time of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and even the Apostle Paul to the Thessalonians deals with the fact that some people apparently had written to the church that the second coming had already occurred. And it really brought great confusion to the early church. You know, when is the second coming? What are the signs of the second coming? And much of that is explained in the Gospels and in the book of Revelation. And also a little bit indirectly is mentioned in the prophet Daniel. Then there were historical heresies dealing with the virgin birth. Some people believe that Satan and Mary had sexual relationship, and that's how we ended up with Christ. Others believe that God had a body and that he had had sex with Mary as well. And so there were various struggles about what it meant, the virgin birth, because it was hard to comprehend how could a virgin become pregnant if there's no contact with a human being. And they said, for example, well, it wasn't really actual, it was more symbolic. Then there are heresies concerning the blood of Christ, that it wasn't really effectual and so forth. Others believe that the resurrection, another historical area, was not physical, but it was spiritual and so forth. Then there are heresies concerning heaven and hell. Many people do not believe, and I'm talking about Christians as well, that Satan exists, nor that hell exists, and that we are simply annihilated at our death. And then there are historical heresies concerning man that we're basically good and that there's only a little reformation needed in our lives. Now, you can read about all these historical heresies in part 2 of the book.